Right, welcome to my webinar on Bahia Bustamante Lodge. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. This webinar will take the form of about a 30-minute presentation on Bahia Bustamante Lodge, and then it'll be followed by a quick Q&A session. So if you have any questions, be sure to note them down and then pop them in the chat box for me, and then we can go over them once that's done. And then once I've done the presentation, I will be sending you all a follow-up email with the link to the recording and some extra information, things like fact sheets, excursion sheets, and links through to our resource center as well. Yeah, so I think I'll begin. Okay, so I don't know how many of you know of or have heard of Bahia Bustamante, but it is a lodge that is located on the Patagonian coast of Argentina. It is what I believe to be an incredibly unique property for many reasons, really, but it sits on the shores of this kind of incredibly long, very diverse Patagonian coastline. It's a few hours south of Puerto Madryn and Peninsula Valdez as a point of reference. So founded in 1950s, it was founded as a seaweed settlement by the grandfather of the current owner, Matthias. And it housed more than 400 seaweed workers and their families. There was a church, a school, a police department, and everything within this small town that the inhabitants needed. And so staying at Bahia Bustamante Lodge also means taking a real kind of journey into the past to discover the amazing life of the pioneers of this truly kind of remote place in Patagonia. As I'm sure you already know, most places you stay in Patagonia are very remote. But this gives a really different aspect because it is on the coastline, and so you don't have these wide open plains in front of you. Instead, you've got these wide open plains behind you with the steppe and the wide open sea in front of you. But as with almost everywhere else in Patagonia, the wind is a constant backdrop sound, but here it's interspersed with the singing of hundreds of species of birds and the breaking of the waves on the shore. So the ocean lies on one side, as I mentioned, in front of the hotel, and then the never-ending steppe behind the hotel. And the history of the place is around every corner of the property. So you'll see kind of references to the seaweed harvesters and the biologists, the sheep ranchers, families and the adventure lovers and artists. And then, of course, the guests from every corner of the world who've all found their place at Bahia Bustamante Lodge over the years and continue to do so. So the aim that the owners want to put across with the experience is really to connect with nature as well as the really rich history of such a special place and its inhabitants. So, as I mentioned, it's located in the Patagonia region within its borders in the Chubut province, making it a haven for wildlife and sea life. It is a 2.5-hour drive north from Comodoro Rivadavia Airport, and it's 3 hours south from Trelew Airport. So as you can see here, you have Trelew here, Puerto Madryn just north of there, Comodoro Rivadavia in the south, and Bahia Bustamante is located here on the coastline. It's incredibly well situated, I think, for a self-drive itinerary, as the roads to get there are very easily navigable. They're very wide and very open, not a very busy highway. So you're on there for a few hours and then you turn off by a petrol station, and it is quite wide, ripio, so hard gravel roads heading down off the steppe towards the coast for about 20 to 30 minutes. And along this little stretch of the last part of your journey, you're glimpsing lots of ranch activity as well as incredible geological formations all around you. One thing to bear in mind is that even though Bahia Bustamante is relatively close to Puerto Madryn and Peninsula Valdez, for people wanting to see whales, they should really bear in mind that whales are not often spotted near Bahia Bustamante. They do have sightings, but not as often. You might see them from Peninsula Valdez. And so if clients are particularly keen on this, they should definitely combine a stay in Peninsula Valdez or Puerto Madryn with a few nights at Bahia Bustamante. And I understand that the best time for spotting whales is around early to mid-December. There are occasional sightings at Bahia Bustamante of southern right whales, the cormorant dolphins and elephant seals, And these are mainly if they're making their way to or from the Peninsula Valdez. So this is an example of the kind of landscape you have around Bahia Bustamante. The whole experience is really characterized by this huge expanse of sky and sea and land. I was there in February last year, so just a year ago. I managed to get in before everything shut down, and I was just really blown away by the and humbled by the experience of feeling like you're a very small kind of particle in this enormous expanse of land and sky. Throughout their property, they have many small roads which apparently lead to nowhere. But when you go on them, you come across these hidden treasures of small bays, deep canyons, these dunes covered in shells, and wide open beaches, all to be discovered during a stay. So Bahia Bustamante, if you can tell from this picture, I'll just move myself up a bit, is located here on this bay. It is the only lodge that we know of along the Patagonian coast, which is right beside the sea. The season is the same as the Patagonia general season, with the lodge opening in October and closing for the winter at the beginning of April. That may change depending on their occupancy, but it's generally end of March, beginning of April. As I mentioned, you can expect the strong winds in spring, but these then tend to calm down in around March time. November is an ideal time for birders, with the beginning of the birthing season for seabirds, and then most species can be seen at the property till mid or late April. Mid-April is the beginning of the migrating season, but you still get to see the penguins and all the other seabirds, but slightly fewer in numbers. So the sea out from the bay is actually part of one of the first marine national parks in Argentina. This is called the Patagonia Austral and UNESCO Blue Patagonia Biosphere Reserve. Rolls off the tongue, really. But this area is an incredibly important breeding, feeding and migration site for more than 670 bird species, mammals and marine species, which can be found in many different ecosystems around the reserve and the property. And so the islands and islets along the coast and the richness of the marine life create this ideal conditions for seabirds to reproduce. And together with the foliage, so you get these kind of small shrubs on the islands and rocks, these then protect the birds from the wind and the swell and land predators such as armadillos, foxes and skunks. So again, it makes it a perfect climate for them. And so naturally, this has also become a very important area for biologists and research scientists from all over the world who've been studying bird life here for more than 20 years. And so I'm going to start with talking about the different activities that guests can do whilst they are at Bahia Bustamante Lodge, and then I'll go on to talk a little bit about the history and the buildings and accommodation options. So this is an example of the map that guests are supplied with when they arrive. Guests are then taken through the different activities that they can do during their stay. Generally, the activities are all half day, and so you'll be doing one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And they'll schedule these and put them on the blackboard outside their restaurant, because they will quite often depend on the weather conditions and the tides as well. Everything here is just very much, it's very relaxed. There's no pretense, it's not at all pretentious. The owners and the manager will always want the guests to kind of feel relaxed and feel that they can do whatever they like to do, but it is a very small place, and it is still kind of, it's very personable experience, really. So the guests are going together with other guests, but if they choose to do something else completely different, then that's fine too. So one of the excursions that they encourage everybody to do is take the boat ride out along a cove to the islands, and this is to see the sea lion and seabird colonies. Navigation of this is done during the high tide hours and in the right weather conditions. The peninsula just south of the lodge, so down here. This is an area where there are some incredibly beautiful beaches and coves, lots of wildlife. It's where guests can take their bikes. They can also go horse riding in this area. Excellent for bird spotting. Another excursion which takes slightly longer than half a day is down to the Cape. So this is down here. Like this journey basically takes about an hour by car by their 4x4. And here again, you have lots of incredible wildlife spotting opportunities. There are some art installations around here as well. And there's the opportunity to do a 3 to 4 hour trek along a canyon, which then ends at the sea in the sea lion colony. You've also got Penguin Island here, number 4. This is a penguin colony that can be reached by foot. So there are then 2 different opportunities to see penguin colonies. And the Petrified Forest and ranch days are taken, and they are way back into the steppe in this area here, which I'll cover in just a moment. So this is one of my favorite pictures really of Bahia Bustamante, because it kind of depicts this incredibly beautiful open sky and these roads that basically will take you across all sorts of different terrain. This is going across these incredible kind of stony and sandy dunes, and quite often you're just going along these kind of dirt tracks, spotting as much wildlife as possible. And then, as I mentioned, you can take bikes out from the lodge, again on the same kind of tracks. So you can go out self-guiding, trekking or biking along the peninsula. And then horseback riding and the navigation in the boats is something that guests can do at extra costs. So the half-day trip out to the islands is probably, as I mentioned, the excursion that people really generally are encouraged to take whilst they're staying at the lodge. If they're only there for, say, 2 nights, then this is one they really try to get them out to see. So the hotel's boat take guests along the quiet cove toward the islands, which are home to the sea lions, the Magellanic penguins, and lots of colourful marine bird colonies. So the sea lion colony on the island is a really important colony, as it represents around 20% of the total number of sea lions which come to breed in this whole Gulf area. And this colony can actually reach up to 4,000 animals during breeding season. So as you can imagine, it can get very noisy, it can get very smelly, but it is absolutely incredible. The boat takes its time along the coast of these islands, making sure the guests get as many kind of glimpses and sights of these sea lions and their pups and any feeding that's going on at the same time. And then there are up to 21 breeding colonies in the area with up to 7 species at each. And the most prevalent of these are the Magellanic penguin colonies, which can grow up to 100,000 individuals. The other colonies which are most commonly cited are the blue-eyed cormorant and the rock cormorant, the former being the main guano producer for Argentina. This meant that their colonies suffered a really great loss in the 19th century from the extraction of guano, but they are, as they are part of this reserve, they are now protected, and their numbers have increased steadily since then. So the penguins here arrive at the end of September and migrate in late April. This whole area as well has been identified as an important bird and biodiversity area, much like the area in the Iberra wetlands where Hotel Puerto Valle is located. And this is because there have been, there's 125 identified bird species, and 13 of 16 of the species which nest in Argentina, they nest here. So there's a huge amount of diversity of bird species. So as well as all the smaller seabirds that you'll see, you'll be sure to spot the larger birds such as the great egrets and even flamingos that are spotted around the bay. And then the endemic species in the area include the Allrogs gull and the Chubut steamer duck. As I mentioned, these are both endemic to the area and very commonly cited, even though they're both rated as internationally as threatened birds. And so that is one opportunity to see big colonies of Magellanic penguins. The second opportunity that guests get to see the Magellanic penguins is on an island which is only 15 minutes drive away from the lodge. During low tide hours, the island can be reached by foot. And this trip is often taken around dusk, as the light is like very, very gentle. It's just settling down on the horizon. and it shines on the nest, and guests can just spend as much time here as they want, just watching and observing the behavior of the nesting penguins and their chicks. And this here is what you walk over to get to the island. And, you know, some people might recognize it. It's called marsh samphire. It's like seaweed but tougher, and it's edible. So one aspect of the lodge, which is really special, is that they try and use as much organic ingredients in their cooking as possible. So a lot of their menu is actually designed around the seaweed, and so you'll often find this in the snacks that they serve or in the menu for the different meals. So this is an example of how close you can get to the penguins and their nesting area, obviously without being intrusive. The guides are very good at letting guests kind of walk around as much as they want to, but also at the same time protecting them for any kind of closeness to humans. It's also a really good place to take kids, as you can get that close to the penguins. And one thing to bear in mind is that there is no minimum age limit for children at Bahia Bustamante. And so beyond the Penguin Island is the Cape. So this is pretty much kind of a half day to full day experience, depending on how active your clients are and how much they want to do. It's a 4x4 drive to reach the Cape, which is an incredibly important rocky point of imposing landscape, open ocean views, and beautiful isolated beaches. There's a lot of wildlife spotting opportunities, either on the journey there, on the journey back, or actually on the Cape itself, with lesser rheas, so the nandus, the maras, which are the large hares, Patagonian hares, grey foxes, and armadillos. And then there is this opportunity to do a short trek to see the sea lion colony, which is at the end of the trek. And this trek is down through this incredibly dry canyon. This picture here on the right hand side shows you a little bit of what it's like. You're very isolated. For as far as you can see, there are absolutely no other inhabitants around. And it has these really beautiful geological formations with a lot of cracked earth underfoot and imposing walls on either side. And then once you reach the end of this canyon, you come out where there's a big wide river that's going out to the sea. And quite often there's a picnic there waiting for you with the guide and the driver, with the sea lion colony just around the corner. The richness of this area also attracts the presence of killer whales, dolphins, and the Cormorant's dolphin. This skeleton has been on the shores of the Cape for as long as the family can remember. And so it kind of shows this biodiversity of different marine life you can get in the area. Occasionally there may well be a right whale or elephant seal visible from there, which have come down from Peninsula Valdez. And so then going back towards the steppe, you have the Petrified Forest. And this is an excursion which takes quite a bit longer, depending on, again, how far they want to trek. Again, it's still kind of flexible as to how active or a client, a guest is, or how much they want to do, or what their interest is really. When I visited here, I was absolutely blown away and fascinated by the fact that we were surrounded by all of these incredible rocks strewn across the whole landscape, which were once wood but now turned to stone in these kind of jewel-like formations. Every moment I was just stepping down and touching them and seeing what they were like and turning them over. Whereas the guide said that some people who come here, they kind of look at it and they think, oh yeah, that's okay, and then they decided to go back again. I could have spent absolutely ages out here, really. You really feel like you're part of an open air and living museum with pieces all around you and these big kind of old trunks sticking out of the cliffs above. So this is what the Petrified Forest kind of stones look like. They are stunning to see and touch and quite mesmerizing. Obviously, they are protected, so you can't take any home with you. They are just there to look at and to touch. But it is a really beautiful trek out to this huge monolith out on the landscape and back to the van. So the steppe also has this incredible wildlife, as well as the marine life and bird life, which I just mentioned. So you get different kind of native animals that live in this part of Patagonia, and these include the nandus. Guanacos sometimes are easily spottable, as well as an armadillo or a skunk that may lean out of a thorny bush every now and again. And the sunset does tend to be the best moment to watch the greatest variety of birds, as well as sunrise, as well as the tinamous and even grey fox and the madas. And so, as well as the many seabirds, guests are very likely to spot other species, such as this great horned owl. And then some other excursions on offer include horse riding. This can be booked directly with the lodge, as it does carry an extra charge. They have their own stables within the property, along with chaps and hard hats. And guests can go out with a guide for half-day or full-day treks, depending on their experience. It's probably worth letting the lodge know in advance, so through your DMC, that clients might be interested in riding, and then the manager will be able to tell them about those options during the check-in. And then there's also the opportunity to take bikes out from the hotel along the tracks to the peninsula. Many of the guests choose to do this for like an hour or two, and some take food with them. And quite often the hotel are happy to advise them about the best beaches or rock pools for a swim as well. So the temperature of the water here in November, December is around 14 degrees. And from January and February, it's about 18 degrees. So it's actually really, it's really pleasant. And not as cold as you might imagine it to be, being so far south. It can get very hot and dry in this area, with temperatures reaching up to about 35 to 40 degrees. So a refreshing dip is exactly what guests might be craving. This is an example of one of the bays, and as you can see, it's very sheltered with this rock formations that surround it. So the currents don't reach so far up to the beach. You're not completely buffered by the waves. And then this is an example of some of the rock pools. If you follow Bahia Bustamante on Instagram, this is one of their most, apart from the birds, they're one of their most favourite kind of Instagrammable moments, is when guests go to these rock pools. They are tidal, so it will depend on whether the tide has come in that night or that morning as to whether they are full, but they're a really wonderful way to kind of cool off and feel refreshed, and then cycle back to the lodge. And they do provide beach towels and can prepare picnics with fresh food from their kitchens. Every excursion that guests go on will have this kind of setup of a picnic or a meal, with tea, coffee and homemade snack break. These are always an incredibly lovely welcome after a dusty walk or a windy boat trip, and the fact that you know that they will have been made lovingly that morning makes it all the more worthwhile. Quite often the guides will also bring along their mate cups and their thermos flasks for guests to try, which adds the which they'll be sipping on throughout the day anyway. So this kind of added extra of Argentinian kind of tradition will add to the whole experience. And then any of the meals that guests want to take can also be taken on a picnic style around the property in different locations. Going back to another excursion they have on offer, this is what they call their ranch day. And this is an opportunity to visit the working farm up in the steppe behind the property. So this farm has been working for generations, around the same time as the seaweed industry, where they actually produce their own sustainable wool. So guests are taken through the production process of the wool, but also the meat. And if the season is right, there's an opportunity for guests to try their hand at a day's work. So this will be visiting the corrals, learning about shearing, about weaning, and the classification of the sheep. Now, because it's been part of the lodge and its family over the years, it's very much part of their whole kind of framework and ecosystem. And they start in August with the shearing of about 20,000 sheep, which then lasts 5 weeks. And then the last days in November, the breeding takes place, and then January, the breeding starts. So both of those around 45 days, to give you an idea of what kind of activities are going on when a client is going to visit. And then they have this historical tour and introduction to the seaweed industry. So this is a walk around the lodge and all the different buildings around the old town, in inverted commas, to learn about its history, the founders, inhabitants, the buildings, and the industry behind the property. So they have a couple of barns where they exhibit a lot of the maps and the photographs and the certificates and the newspaper articles and clippings, things like that. And they also have quite a lot of the old machinery that was used in the seaweed processing still there. And then one of the resident guides actually started to curate and develop their own interpretation centre. So this is an area with many mammal, bird and fish skeletons, as well as some fossils and other natural history elements, which help form an idea of how many species lived in the area. It's beautifully done and very carefully looked after. And actually, on that same vein, some of the staff from the lodge who work in the kitchen, I'm thinking because of the guide who did this actually had been guiding there since the lodge opened. They're also actually descendants of those who worked in the seaweed industry, actually born on the land. So Matthias, the owner, really wanted to kind of create this environment where people didn't feel like they had to leave if they wanted to stay, and so we're working with him at the lodge. And then Bahia Bustamante has one of the only seaweed vineyards in the world. This is something very new for them, just in the last few years. And they have just harvested their grapes for this year, the first harvest. The grapes are all organic and they've been grown biodynamically. Literally today I just saw that they had an Instagram post on their first harvest where they were picked their Semillon and Pinot Noir grapes as a team. So Matthias and his wife Astrid worked with one of the top kind of winemakers in the country called Matthias Michelini. And they kind of wanted to create this wine that had the magic of the beach and the soul of the ocean, is what they call it, with the intention of producing a wine free of any preservatives and is as natural as possible. So they're happy to curate these wine tasting evenings, which they'll take guests outside for, along with a lot of their delicacies, like their seaweed croquettes. And they take people to their sunset bar. This is a landmark a few meters away from the lodge. It's a really incredible spot where once a month the sun sets on the step behind the lodge, and then the full moon rises over the ocean, and this happens at exactly the same time. So this is a really incredible experience for anyone who is just in the area really at that time. The owners, Matthias and Astrid, and as well as the manager, Maria, will always want to make people feel kind of as part of their community as possible. And so we'll try and bring guests together to enjoy these spectacular moments. And then full moon nights give this incredible landscape a glow, casting long shadows over the plains and the sand. But when the moon is just a slither in the sky, when it's not giving off a lot of light pollution, the stars are beyond anything I think I've seen before. It's a veritable blanket of stars from one horizon to the other. I spent a good hour or so lying down on one of the benches just outside, just watching them all and watching the shooting stars. And especially with no light pollution, the Milky Way really stands out very prominently. They have their own telescope and their own guide who knows a lot about the constellations. So, you know, there's a whole conversation around that as well. And then in terms of sustainability, this is really at the heart of what the lodge is about. You know, the minimal environmental impact, conservation, low energy use and protection of species have always been very high up on the agenda at Bahia Bustamante. They've recently written a whole report on their sustainability credentials, so that's something I can share with you. But for now, I can let you know that roughly 80% of their energy has come from solar and wind power. They use their area as a research base for biologists and other scientists. Their water comes from a spring, and they have all reusable organic amenities in the bathrooms, and they practice their holistic livestock management as well. But there are many other initiatives which I can send on to you. So for now, we'll go on to the actual buildings and accommodation options. So a bit about the lodge itself. As I mentioned, it was founded in the 1950s, so 1953, by Matthias's grandfather. He wanted to produce what they call Malvic hair gel from seaweed. So after traveling all over the Patagonian coastline, he discovered Bahia Bustamante, which had been known as the Rotten Bay due to the accumulation of rotten seaweed. And so after the research, and together with his 4 sons, started the harvest. And so then it was born, including more houses for more than 400 employees over the years, a school, church, police station, grocery store. And then more and more land was incorporated, leading to the beginning of the sustainable wool production. So here's an aerial photograph of the lodge. As you can see, it's laid out in a small kind of town infrastructure. A lot of these streets are named after seaweeds. Here you have the area where the main lodge is located. So this is where the restaurant and living room spaces are. These four huts or like cabins here are the superior sea cabins. These are the standard sea cabins. And then back here behind, you've got the step cabins. This is the old church, these are the barns. This is where a lot of the biologists and staff live as well. So this is the area where you first arrive, where the check-in is done, and actually with a friendly welcome on one of the benches outside. It's basically where the town had its old general store, and today it holds some of the common areas of the lodge, preserving the typical Patagonian atmosphere with games inside, as well as the old maps and books, traditional furniture and relics from the times past. So inside this main building, we have the restaurant, which was their old general store, and they serve all local food in a menu based on, well, seaweed, lamb, beef, fish, and other sea products, as well as lots of very fresh fruits and vegetables from their organic garden. You can quite often spot the nandu just pottering past the window whilst you're eating your meal as well. So this is where all the meals are served, unless you're out on an excursion and you have a meal served outside. With guests often sharing the tables here, you know, the guests are asked if they want to share tables, but they really want to kind of create this communal atmosphere. And the owners do come to the restaurant in the evenings and sit with guests to kind of talk, you know, about share stories and experiences of the area. So they have their own vegetable garden at the back of the property with many different plants. They have a lot of people coming through doing kind of horticultural and agricultural courses, stay for a few weeks at a time. So this is back to the restaurant to show you the back of it and where the general store kind of furnishings are. So they've still got these same shelves, they've still got the scales on the side here, they've got the old kind of meat cutter there. But it doesn't feel at all contrived or out of place. It just feels beautifully kind of historic and rustic. So for breakfast, guests can expect a very simple kind of Argentine breakfast with cereals, fruits and homemade bread and jams, hams and butter and whatnot. And then for lunch and dinner, they are served a 3-course meal, which is fixed. They put it up on the blackboard every day. Again, all with fresh local ingredients and very much with ingredients of what they have at the time. So that's one thing to bear in mind. You know, the cuisine is not varied necessarily, but it is delicious and they take great care of it. And they do still cater for vegetarians and vegans and other dietary requirements. So the other areas of this building, you have the bar and living room with these huge windows looking out to sea. It's a perfect place to relax with a book or just watch the birds. In the library, there are many guidebooks on the birds and the wildlife and lots of maps of the area as well. And this is where you also have the memorial room, which is a room full of objects used back when the property was at its height of production in the 60s, and information of the life of more than 400 workers. And then behind the restaurant is a place called the Club, where there's a game room with a pool table, ping pong table, football table, and board games. Quite useful to keep families occupied during a quiet morning or afternoon. And so on to the rooms. There are 4 superior sea cabins. These are the old houses which used to belong to the first inhabitants and have been renovated into hotel rooms, and always taking into account the austerity and simplicity which characterised lifestyle here from the beginning. The idea being to keep alive the spirit of those who came here over 50 years ago. They are located just beyond the main building and are housed in their own units with 2 double bedrooms each. A small kitchen lounge, large windows out to sea, and some lounges and a coffee machine and whatnot. As you can see, the decor is quite simple, it's quite rustic, but it is incredibly comfortable. And the sound of the sea outside is a really lovely thing to fall asleep to and wake up to. So they're spacious, but at the same time quite cozy. They have a maximum capacity of 4 adults, but the 2 bedrooms are never sold separately. And so the guests will always only have that 1 unit to themselves, even though they're just a couple. This is an example of the different areas that you find within the sea cabins. And then you have 2 standard rooms, again, each with 2 double rooms, a small lounge, but these are in one building themselves, so they're not in the standalone units. Again, these are quite a bit simpler than the Superior Sea cabins, have a smaller window overlooking the sea, but they still have a capacity of 4 adults, so again, really good for families. And then they have the 5-step cabins, which are behind the other buildings. So these don't have a direct sea view, and again, are simpler still, really. They have 1 double room, dining room, small living room with a single bed, bathroom and a kitchen with a cooktop and basic tableware. This, I think, these step cabins are particularly good for self-drive. If people want to do a lot of shopping themselves and cook for themselves, they don't want to spend that extra money. They're very simple, but they're also very affordable. Ideal for families or young people on the self-drive. And then they can pay for any extra excursions whilst they're here, as well as the meals. And they also have their own fire pit area and barbecue area, which kind of adds this sense of authenticity to the place. So as you can see here, they've got quite small rooms. They've got doors straight out towards the sea, little kitchenettes. And then that's it. This is Matthias and Astrid, who are the owners of the lodge. Incredibly friendly, very unassuming people, very, very kind, with incredible vision of a place that they have created to allow people to really immerse themselves in nature and learn about the history of the region while just, taking these incredible excursions out into the landscape and out to sea. And then Maria here, she's the one who does all the check-ins and excursions and make sure everyone is comfortable. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. This is a quick overview of the key selling points of the hotel. I think I've mentioned everything on here, and it is something that I will be sending you in the follow-up as well, with some different links. And then, of course, we'll send you links to our photo library and our resource center and our own website and their website. And then the only thing left to say really is that the next 3 webinars I'll be doing over the next 3 weeks are Costa Rica. So I'll be concentrating on Pacuari Lodge, Lapa Rios Lodge, and then Casilla Papagayo. So please don't hesitate don't forget to register for them. And then the best thing to do, even if you can't make the live webinar, is still to register, because I'll be following up with an email to everybody anyway. So thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?